Hello everybody. So we have a very early and sophisticated piece of port furniture here, dating to about the year 1700. So we are at the beginning of the timeline that we generally consider for this very special type of furniture made in ports from the 17th to the early 19th centuries. And pieces like this evoke the adventure of sailing around the world, commerce, maritime trade, transatlantic trade between the Old World and the New. And for that matter, what other region could be more associated with maritime power at this point in time than, say, the Netherlands, the Dutch ports, or maybe more exactly here, Flanders, maybe the port of Antwerp for this piece. I seem to situate it stylistically, sort of between France and the Netherlands. Okay, but more generally, these pieces are prized. They are known for being in these exotic, precious hardwoods, such as mahogany here, which would, of course, arrive into Europe via the ports where they would be in relative abundance and therefore used in their solid form to make this very interesting, cosmopolitan, cutting edge in terms of design furniture. Cutting edge because the port makers had access to new ideas and travel. And then, of course, the clientele was particularly wealthy. So anyway, you have to imagine some sort of austere Flemish millionaire standing here at the desk, counting his money and wondering if some of his doubloons didn't wash overboard in a Caribbean storm somewhere, right? That's the romanticism of these port pieces. We might see this thing up against a wall with a window overlooking a port. You can hear the seagulls, the creak of the moorings. Obviously, we appreciate these pieces for their aesthetic elegance because the mahogany is impervious to woodworm attack, relatively speaking, and therefore these pieces traverse time particularly well. But in general, this is a type of piece, as I'm trying to convey, that evokes the notion of commerce. And in fact, we see the notion of commerce here in these three locks across the fall front. Originally, I thought that maybe the original lock had been replaced because it broke, and then two others were added, but upon closer inspection of the fall front, you can actually see that originally there were three locks here, meaning that this fall front was really intended to shut and to be very secure. That is probably, by the way, the monogram of the person who commissioned this piece, B-A-E, and one can be certain that whoever commissioned a piece like this at the time had and was making a lot of money. And back to the point of how these port pieces, this port secretary, three-bodied trois corps secretary, is really associated with money and commerce. Well, we see that the damn thing has three locks here, which is practically unheard of. You see that they really wanted it to shut and to protect whatever was kept inside. Probably accounts, shipping logs, even currencies. And there are various clever secret compartments where one might imagine that, you could have stored currencies from countries with which your country was not necessarily allied, and therefore, you needed to keep those deals under wraps. These are probably the most clever secret compartments inside of the piece. So anyway, these cunning little secret compartments add a little extra security in case someone did break in here. Well, let's just check out this wonderful blackened interior, especially these scrolls here that decorate the inside. These rolling divisions between the cubby holes kind of remind us of the scrolls of the top cornice or some of the curves of the panels there around the glass, which is probably not original, mind you. We're going to notice that these carvings here, this paneling, echoes the paneling of the exterior, again there and on those bottom drawers. And then, of course, these little drawers are secret ones, but if anybody is familiar with this type of secretary, you sort of come to expect that you'll find a stack of secret drawers here. And these still smell of camphor, which is a clear waxy substance from the camphor laurel tree of Southeast Asia. It would be applied as, well, a wax to help these slide better, but also as a way to discourage insects from eating the soft functional wood of the drawers here. They would also use lavender, and I've even been told by the secret and mysterious administrator of a wonderful French furniture website, meublits.com, that part of the blackening of the backs of these pieces, which we will look at in a bit, done with walnut essence or sometimes oxblood, whatever that was, that's what it's referred to in French, that this blackening was not necessarily stylistic, but it was rather a way to protect the soft backs from being eaten by insects. So the next secret compartment inside of the desk that I thought we should take a look at is obviously this part which slides back, and we have to be very careful because it's 325 years old and part of it is coming apart. That's pretty clear that secret compartment is there. But to me, the most successful secret compartment is actually just the space behind this cubby hole where you can actually reach around at 90 degrees. And there's sort of an optical illusion in terms of your depth perception here, that when you face the piece and you look straight in, you wouldn't necessarily know that there's anything back here. So if someone was rifling through your stuff in here, at a glance, they might not register that the back here isn't as deep as it should be and that there is in fact a hidden space at 90 degrees behind this and then behind this. So that's probably the most ingenious part of the inside of the desk, in my opinion. Regarding all of the secret compartments and the center body of this piece, I did rattle it around quite a bit upon acquiring the item, hoping to dislodge something good like an Antwerp diamond, something that had been forgotten inside, but all I found was a letter from 1945, some sort of a bill actually, and some rusty quill tips. Better than nothing. But anyway, I guess those objects are to the tune of my argument that this is a business piece, not a piece in front of which you sit and muse, write poetry, but rather a piece, as we can see from the height of the fall front here, a piece in front of which you stand counting money, writing checks. This is clearly a type of work piece, albeit for a very elegant office somewhere. But again, this is a piece for counting money, for doing deals. And while we have the fall front open here of this standing desk, we should really take a look at one of the most charming aspects of the piece, these hinges. These look to me to be original. I would say that that's pretty incontestable. And as we pan over these hinges, which are like something straight out of Pirates of the Caribbean, we are going to see this slightly lighter portion of the middle part of the fall front where clearly a writing leather used to be, and then we see the traces of the holes of the little nails or tacks that would have held that leather down. I'm probably not going to go to the trouble to have that replaced because without the leather, it's actually really cool to see some of this metalwork from the early 1700s. In fact, it's one of my favorite parts of the piece. And so when I was looking around for what could possibly be rattling inside of this piece, I forgot to mention I did find this little handle, the tirette, for this bar, which appears to be original. The other one is completely missing. However, a team of craftsmen, of restorers, ébénistes, whatever it's called in English, they will be coming tomorrow to pick this desk up and take it to their workshop to fix a few of these little minor issues, which is why we're doing the video now in pretty terrible light. I'm sorry about that, but I can't control the sun on my last afternoon with the piece here at the house. But back to that point of it being a business piece, the next thing I want to take a look at is up here in the glass panel, the glass paned window bookcase part of this desk. If we open this up, we're actually going to see two replacement shelves, by the way, as well as an original shelf. Now, I'm going to have these shelves embellished so that they match the original one a little bit more. But when we're in here, what we actually discover is that these are not replacements of shelves that were lost. Originally, I believe there was only one shelf and it was up higher because here we see some holes on the back of the piece, fixation points for what I believe was a sort of gradin or a bunch of tiered cubby holes disposed in here. We see the vertical divisions of which have been completely sawed off here by someone at a later date who apparently decided to customize the piece. And that leads me to believe that if this part of the piece was intended to store even more clutter and papers with just one shelf way above, that originally probably we didn't have glass here, but perhaps another mahogany panel similar to what you see here because, you know, it just wasn't built to display things in a cute manner. This was a work piece. It was built with cubby holes to be full of papers and clutter. So while we're here, now we should take a look at these extendable candle tables. Those are extremely charming in my opinion. And we're going to notice that they are the right size for miniature candlesticks, not a full-size large one. You need to have the tiny little models there. It'd be great to find a couple. And anyway, as we close them, we will discover that the entire bottom section of the bookcase is in fact a secret drawer in which we will find the blackened wood sleeves which contain the extendable candle surfaces. All right, so with the secret drawer closed, it leads me to the point that this is a pretty sophisticated and complete piece in terms of design for being so early and of an unusual city of origin. But that helps us remember never to confuse these port pieces with clumsy country furniture, although both are made in solid wood. This is very special exotic wood, and the port makers and their clientele were more cosmopolitan and worldly, arguably, than people in relatively landlocked so-called trend-setting cities. The ports, with such opportunities for travel and exchange of ideas, were on the cutting edge of design, and the patrons there had the means to commission wonderful things. So now a little bit more casually, this piece was really dans son jus, in its own juice, sort of languishing in an original state of conservation-ish when I found it. There was just about 50 years of inconsequential but very impressive grime covering it from being in a storage unit for a long time. That is part of what guaranteed that any non-professional would totally overlook this. Now, the other thing that helped others overlook this piece for so long is national bias, because here in France, there might be a tendency for someone operating under the French national bias to sort of write this off as an extraneous, non-French weird item, which of course negates the fact that at the time this was made, the Flemish and the Dutch ports were perhaps richer and more important than French ones. And also, if we think of master furniture makers or ébénistes, the very first ones ever using veneers were Dutch. Even the most famous French furniture maker of all time, probably André Charles Boulle, his father was Dutch. There are many others like that. So it's sort of hard to cast something aside because of its Dutchness, or in this case, its far northern Frenchness with some sort of Dutch-Flemish influence. But anyway, I'm just trying to delineate some of the categorical errors that lead people, that underpin someone overlooking a very good piece. And usually it's a combination of bias stylistically and judging a book by its cover. So just remember, if something is dirty, that's really not a problem. I basically cleaned this piece up myself in a matter of days, really a matter of hours. I had it fairly well transformed, because underneath all of that dust, which I hope I'm showing you in some of the B-roll overlaid, but underneath that dust was this very wonderful rempli ciré polish. So this is a filled and waxed polish. It's similar to a pad polish or a French polish, but instead of using lacquer dissolved in solvent, the polish applied is actually a very resilient, hard wax. So you start by kind of stripping the wood, bringing the wood down to a bare state, and then you take a pad and you fill the pores of the wood with pumice powder. And that provides you with a perfectly flat surface, and then you take your same pad, a little bit of wool and a linen cloth or whatever it is that you would use to apply a pad polish. But instead of using lacquer dissolved in solvent, you use a type of hard beeswax dissolved in solvent, and you apply it meticulously, and you end up with a finish that is sort of between a can of wax and a French polish. So it's as resilient as a French polish, but not quite as shiny. And this is a really fine, very special finish that is consistent with how this piece really used to be the pride and joy of someone, and how it probably had a very prominent place in someone's home before it was forgotten over the last 50 years. But now that's a type of polish that, people really have kind of forgotten about, except for a few artisans that are still down this rabbit hole, and people like me and now you. But that's what we're seeing here. It's a rempli ciré, a filled and waxed finish on the piece. So a piece like this needs to be conceptualized as an early and important addition to the known works of port furniture. And it's also an opportunity for us to have something from this rare and coveted period, which is a genuine article, due to its extraneous, somewhat unusual nature, because so many of the key French pieces from the 18th century, the grand classique, like a commode Louis XV, well, a lot of those typically Parisian pieces, no one's going to fake a crazy but wonderful Flemish port piece, but a lot of the key Parisian pieces that are so famous, those were faked to hell and back. during the early 20th century by forgers such as André Maillefer, who operated out of Orleans with his hundreds of employees. So in a way, not only do I like eccentric items, but it's really reassuring to see a piece like this because we know in general it's probably real. And that is really not the case when we're looking at the grand classics of French furniture. The more prototypical a piece is, the more likely it was in André Maillefer's catalog of things that he was heavily counterfeiting to sell to rich Americans. Anyway, a piece like this, you're pretty much safe from something like that. Now, of course, there have been a few changes, like the metalwork has been swapped out. But what's nice about this piece is that other than a few little things that appear to have been altered, you know, were there some brackets here that held candlesticks? I think there might have been. You know, there's a few missing elements, but all of that is congruent with the life of a piece. You know, the change inside and the addition of windows and swapping out the bronzes, that isn't trafficking or embellishment or destruction. That's just simply the way a piece evolves over 325 years of its existence. You know, there is a back foot missing, but we do see that the front decorative feet are still here. And we do see how the feet actually follow the interesting corners of the piece with these imbrications, the sophistication and the complexity of all these moldings. We can follow this beautiful corner all the way up to the top of the piece. And, you know, all of these little details that I try to point out on these pieces are important to retain because without them, the piece loses its aspect as a benchmark example of something. It becomes far less interesting. And although this might seem simple, it's actually quite rare to have doors on the side of the piece which open. See, the fact that this won't open, though, is why the master furniture makers are coming to take this piece away. It needs to have a little bit of work done, but you know what? Of course it needs work. It's 325 years old. Now, one of the coolest parts of the sides is that they appear to retain the original shelves in these weird little trapezoidal shapes that were cut perfectly to go inside of this very shallow compartment over here. And that's really special to still have that. In general, the bottom tier of the piece opening by two doors, that is far rarer than the types of bureau scribant, bibliothèque, sort of secretary desk and bookcases that we're going to see, which of course would have exposed drawers on the front. As a further aside, the bottom tiers that open by doors like this, especially with these panels, that is really more to the tune of the 17th century than it is the 18th. We could really even argue that this piece dates to the late 1600s more so than it does the early 18th century, but I think it's accurate to categorize this as circa 1700. But anyway, the way the bottom is designed, it's clearly very much influenced by the Louis XIV French style. The simulated sculpted fabric there that drapes below the carved monogram, that's very much a Louis XIV period decorative element. So the piece to me is more Baroque, more late 17th century than it is certainly mid-18th. But again, all of that is conjecture, and on such a strange piece, it's really hard to get more specific than we have been. So let's go ahead and check out some of the hidden parts of the piece, such as the roof up here, which is just older than the hills. Somebody should come up here and take a look at it because it's really cool. I actually conferred with a few experts. Occasionally I bring other people in. An expert is just someone who has decided that they have nothing more to learn about a subject. But anyway, the experts told me that the blackened rough top here, as well as the back of the piece, is absolutely perfect. It's exactly what we would hope to find on a genuine circa 1700 piece. And so that's kind of cool. Furthermore, when we get up here, we can see some circular traces of where there were some finials, not just empty platforms where you might have put a vase, but there are some circular traces where the base of like a sculpted mahogany finial might have been. I'm not completely dismayed that those have gone missing. I think they would have just cluttered up the top. But that's what was going on up here originally, decoratively. We also see some of the missing moldings that I will soon be paying a professional to replace so that when this piece is delivered, it will live up to the scrutiny of my very demanding customers, of course. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the back of the piece while we've been discussing it. It's quite interesting. I find that the backs of these pieces are always interesting to examine. You really feel that the piece is old, although it is always jarring to come back and look at the back and say, oh my God, look at how rough and cheap it is back there. But the back just helps you understand to what degree this is a work of art. It's an illusion. You know, you're looking at this beautiful red, harmonious thing that impresses you, and then you come back here and you say, oh my God, it's a dead tree. So that's, you know, interesting conceptually to understand that these pieces of furniture are kind of akin to a wonderful oil painting. Who would ever go look at the back of a canvas? It's startling. So anyway, everybody, with all of that being said, I thank you for your time. I thank you for 3,000 subscribers. I really appreciate it. It's great to have a digital trace now for everyone of this previously undocumented port piece, circa 1700, probably from Antwerp, as my books on port furniture do not contain a piece of this ilk from this time period, which is quite as interesting. So I'm really delighted to have been able to share it with you. I never buy anything because I think someone's going to buy it from me. So you have to buy things as a professional or as a collector because of the aesthetic emotion that the piece produces in you. And hopefully you have refined your taste enough such that you can trust that. But you pick a piece for its adherence to certain objective criteria of beauty, quality, and rarity. You do not pick a piece because someone in Dallas is going to pay you a lot of money. Anyway, brevity is the soul of wit. I'm working on that. I thank you all very much for your time, and I will catch you at the next video.